Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Crazy Ken. I'm back again with another book review, and this one is a very interesting one because this is a series I haven't read in a very long time since high school, and I decided to go ahead and jump right back into it because for as long as I can remember and have been reading books for the longest amount of time, I've always had a strange fascination for books that pretty much concern the supernatural, from classic stuff like Dracula and Frankenstein all the way up to the current classics like the Vampire Lestat series or the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. And no, the Twilight series does not count because that is absolute garbage writing. But the most interesting media to portray the supernatural is the Japanese media, or in this case, anime or light novels, because they seem to be taking the mythos of vampires and werewolves and somehow manage to make some really actual good stuff like Dance in the Vampire Bund and Chibi Vampire and Rosario Vampire. Okay, granted, those animes pretty much have a lot of more than the mythos and whatnot, but you get my drift. Because of the vampires and werewolves and everything, they can pretty much make some really good anime and some great stories out of it. But one in particular that still holds as probably one of my most favorite and probably, in my opinion, probably like the best storytelling when it comes to supernatural stuff, even still selling millions of copies to this day, is the Vampire Hunter D series. And the series is about a Dhampir, which is a half human, half vampire hybrid hunter who travels the world in a post-apocalyptic future where vampires are the lords and masters of that world. So the story is about D is pretty much so popular that he has had numerous novels written about him. He has had manga, films, and even a video game that was actually released about him. But even with all that, there's still some mystery to this vampire hunter, and what better way to find out about those mysteries than taking a look at his very first outing in his first novel, Vampire Hunter D. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as always, before I pretty much start on a book, I always have to talk about the author. So let's go ahead and talk about him. Hideyuki Kikuchi. I think I butchered his name. Hideyuki Kikuchi has been writing stories of Vampire Hunter D since 1983 and wouldn't make its way stateside until 2005. He's most well known for writing horror novels and mangas such as The Dark Side Blues and another popular series that you've probably already seen the movie based off of, which is called Wicked City. Now, I'll take a look at these two in the future, but one interesting thing about Vampire Hunter D is that the illustrations provided for the book series were also done by Yoshitaka Amano. And if you don't know who that is, he's most noticeable for his character art for the Final Fantasy series, a series that I pretty much love to this very day. And I love his art style of how he can pretty much take males and pretty much give them a more feminine feature. For the illustrations as well, they pretty much make it have a more horrifying feel because this is supposed to be a horror novel, which I'm used to supernatural stuff, so it doesn't really scare me that much. But at the same time, it still pretty much makes some really dark and gothic like imagery to where it pretty much makes it seem so horrific to pretty much like imagine being in a world like this. Without further ado, let's go ahead and pretty much jump into the dark world, which is Vampire Hunter D. So the story takes place in the year 1290 AD. After the nuclear holocaust devastated the planet, which is now called the Frontier, vampires, demons, and even mutants have claimed the Earth as their own, as humans pretty much live in small settlements and pretty much have to fend for themselves. As D travels the land, he comes across a farm girl named Doris Lang. After the girl uses her skills taught by her father, who was a werewolf hunter, to attack D to no avail, it was confirmed that he can help her with a certain problem. You see, Doris was bitten by one of the nobility, one Count Magnus Lee, and she's in desperate need of a hunter of D's skills in order to vanquish him before he makes Doris his bride. But not only will he have to pretty much deal with the Count himself, but he will have to protect Doris from the paranoid townspeople, especially the mayor's piece of shit son, and the Count and his daughter, as well as a traveling thief named Ren Ginsei and his traveling band of freaks. Just another day for the gorgeous youth known as D. My thoughts on the story is, well, it's kind of basic. It does have some things to think about when it comes to the backstory and the lore that the world pretty much sets up. And that's where the book pretty much sells me on, is that despite the fact that there's barely any good plot for the book itself, it's just your basic plot. Damsel in distress. The hero comes in to save the damsel, tries to vanquish the evil, and then next thing you know, he saves the girl in the end. However, it pretty much draws me more in with the lore of the world itself, and that's where the big selling point is, especially with the certain vampire lore that the book introduces. Like, you got your basic stuff like vampires are weak against steaks, they're weak against garlic, they're weak against the cross and all that, but it pretty much establishes more to it, to where the mystery of how the humans correlate with the nobility. Like, for example, there's the possibility that vampires have performed experimentation on the surviving humans after the fallout that led to humanity forgetting the weakness of the vampires. In the book, it states that there was a time where there was a weakness that was pretty much discovered by Doris's father, but before he could write down what that weakness was, he pretty much completely just forgot about it after he pretty much faced the vampire in battle. And what that tells me is that every single time when someone learns of a vampire's weakness and after they face that vampire, it's kind of like their brain automatically just erase everything that they learned at that point. So imagine how scary it is that to learn that there is a weakness that you can use in order to pretty much destroy the vampires, if you will, but then next thing you know, when you remember it, you just forget it just like that. And I think that's one advantage that they pretty much put over the humanity, is that they can pretty much like manipulate our minds and pretty much make us forget certain things to where it can pretty much lead down to their destruction. I mean, we pretty much already know that they can be destroyed by sunlight, they don't come out, and you know, humanity could always just attack them while they're sleeping in their coffins in the daytime. That's also a disadvantage, because over the years, as the vampires, you know, rule the world and everything, they pretty much use their technological expertise in order to pretty much make machines that defend them during the day. So that way, say for instance that humans decided they're not going to take it anymore, they're going to pretty much destroy their vampire lord, so they decide to storm his castle. Next thing you know, that castle is armed with so many armaments and so many weapons like lasers and stuff that is going to blow a human to bits before they even reach the front gate. So yeah, so it's the nobility know how to pretty much keep the humans in their place as well as protect themselves. And this is the type of future that we're living in right now. It's like they could do whatever they want with us, but when it comes to us defending ourselves or pretty much finding a way to destroy them, there's no way for us to destroy them. Either you forget what you learned or you pretty much wind up dead at the moment you try to like stand up to them outright. And that's kind of like a really scary future. But I do also like the small stuff that the story goes into detail about, like for example the different strengths and skills when it comes to hunters of each caliber, the vampire hunter being the most powerful because duh, obviously, and then it goes from vampire hunter to werewolf to arachne hunter and shit like that. So it's kind of interesting that that's what made me more interested in it, is because of the fact that I'm learning more about the world as I read it, especially in some cases where the story just takes a pause and then it explains to you just how things work on the frontier, both in the vampire world and in the human world. And it's just, you know, it's an interesting read. That much I could give it for. So long story short, the plot of the actual story isn't all that interesting, but the lore and the world that is being made up for it has some really good world building, and I pretty much love that about this book. It gives me a good imagery of what this world is like. Let's go ahead and talk about the characters. First, we got Vampire Hunter D, the title character of the series, a mysterious vampire hunter that is a Dhampir who pretty much is tasked with ridding the land of vampires. Although he looks young, he's unlike any man, vampire, or even a Dhampir that's ever existed. With a cold expression and his sharp skills, as well as his sword, D is ready to take down any threat, be they vampire or otherwise. There's also Doris Lang, a farm girl who has been bitten by the vampire who rules the land, that hired D for his services in hopes of destroying the count. Though she may be a farm girl, she's anything but, armed with a whip, fighting skills taught by her father, who was a werewolf hunter, and with a sharp tongue. She definitely is no pushover, along with her little brother Dan being 8 years old and pretty much knowing how to shoot a rifle. And then we also have the residents of the town of Ransilva, who is Doc Farango, a local physician. There's also Sheriff Dalton, who is the only law enforcement in the town. And then there's Mayor Roman, who's the supposed ruler of the town, who is a fat-winded coward character. He's basically one of those characters that just sits there and complains, but he doesn't really do anything about it because he's a huge pussy. But not as much of a pussy as his son, who is Greco, who is not only a dimwit, but he is also the town bully who hides behind his father's power in order to pretty much fuel his own gains, which is pretty much trying to get Doris to be his bride and everything. He's basically like the Vampire Hunter D version of Gaston. I know I compared a lot of characters to Gaston, probably because even though I hate that character, I love that character, but when you read this book, it does feel like this character is kind of like Gaston, because literally he shows that he's persistent. He shows that he will do anything to get his way, even if it means ruining the person that he wants to marry's life. So he's an absolute scumbag to a T. I'm sorry. I hate characters like this, but at the same time, it's so funny to see them get their comeuppance. Also, Dee will have to face the Nobility, which is Count Magnus Lee, the vampire lord of the region responsible for feeding on Doris and the main antagonist of the novel, as well as his daughter Larmika, who is just as cold but more violent, kind of like that psychotic ex-girlfriend that you wish you could forget. And then there's the Fiend Corps, which are a band of mutants led by their thief leader, who is Reagan Say, a cunning mutant with the ability to open gateways in his body. And that guy, I really hate him. I hate him so freaking much the more I read this. The book says that his beauty rivals that of Dee's, but even with that, it's like he is an absolute scumbag. Tries to sacrifice his band just so he can pretty much become part of the Nobility. And then he tries to Doris at one point after she accidentally, well, it was an accident, she pretty much defended herself, after she pretty much killed one of his band members, and he tried to force himself on her. And then his ego was shattered when he came across Dee, who pretty much made him look like a bitch, not once but twice. I hate this character, and when you read this book, you will see why. When I say he is the absolute personification of a snake, he is a snake. Greco is bad, but this guy is much worse. He is just plain evil. Although the story has a lot of interesting characters, both major and not so much, my only gripe with it is that because there are so many characters, it takes a lot of focus away from the actual main characters themselves. Like, I know Dee is a bit of an exception because there may be more to his story as the series goes on, but when it comes to characters like Doris, we don't really have enough time to pretty much explore her side and to pretty much understand her backstory or understand anything about her at all. We know she was trained by her father, and we know that he's a hunter and everything. That's all that we got out of it. But why not take a moment to maybe flush it out a bit? Maybe like a flashback to give us some idea of what her upbringing was like or something. And this is one other thing that pretty much pissed me off. When Doris made her first appearance and when she was a strong-willed woman ready to fight no matter what the cost is, especially when she pretty much met Dee, see what kind of a fighter he was. So she was pretty much a strong-willed woman, and she knows that she can take care of herself. She's shown this many times. But then after she meets Dee, she winds up getting herself in trouble so often to the point where Dee has to come and save her. It's like she went from being a badass like Lara Croft, and suddenly she just morphed into Princess Peach from Super Mario. She just winds up getting herself in trouble, and she winds up getting rescued, and that's where I pretty much like lost my shit at this point. It's as if she went from being a strong character and suddenly lost all conviction of that, and if she became the person that the main character has to save. She became like the Mary Jane of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and it's just painful to see. Hell, you can make the argument that she has had badass moments, like when she fought off the Count when he tried to claim her the first time, or when she pretty much took on the witch, who was part of the Fiend gang that I mentioned before, and then when she went to look for Dee at the castle. But then there are moments like after she pretty much fought against the Count, she pretty much winds up getting overwhelmed and almost being bitten by him, if not for the charm Dee placed on her. And then at the castle ruins, after she defeats the witch and came across Ren Gensei, she winds up running from him. Then again, I keep forgetting he's a mutant who can pretty much like use wormholes in his body. Other than that, she went from being a strong character to somebody who pretty much like winds up depending on Dee as much as pretty much the story allows it. Speaking of Dee, in all honesty, he is probably the most interesting character out of anyone in the entire book. Not because he's the main character, but because there is so much mystery behind his upbringing that it pretty much makes it more worth the read. According to the book, we know he has some connection to the sacred ancestor of the vampires, which is Dracula, obviously a Dracula, who else would it be? Which would probably mean that D could be his offspring. Hell, even in the book, the Count says that D bears a striking resemblance to the sacred ancestor, which would probably explain how D would have more power and strength than any Dhampir and vampire combined. This leaves room to wonder about his heritage or the identity of his real parents, and the more I wondered about his past, the more I started to feel kind of bad for the character. It's like I wanted to know more about him, but it's like the more I know about him, the more I start to feel that loneliness, because he's already feared by the human world and he's already deemed a traitor by the vampire world. Now he's stuck in the cross line to where he can't coexist with either, and now he's walking that life of loneliness. Couple that with being a hunter, pretty much hunting monsters all the time, and hunters already got enough rep as it is to where they can't live a normal life. So you couple that with being a Dhampir, that is an extremely lonely life to begin with. And I guess that's what the book is pretty much showing the more we pretty much get to know the character, because of the fact that he pretty much is a hybrid of both worlds that can never coexist. He is doomed to pretty much live a really sad life. And judging by the fact that he could be like maybe thousands of years old, could you imagine being that lonely for thousands and thousands of years? That's like hell. Being a hunter is hard enough, but the life of a Dhampir is just painful. Knows how to care for people because of that compassion, and which I think he got from his mother, whoever she may be. And the more you pretty much see him interact with Doris, and the more they pretty much have a moment, you actually want to see these two get together, work with each other, and pretty much like be with one another. But you already know that's not going to happen, because one, he's a hunter, two, he's a Dhampir, not going to pretty much work in their favor. It's just, the more I talk about this and the more I think about it, it's really depressing. And I get that's what the author is trying to show, just how sad and dark and empty D's life is, but it's like the more you read it, it's just, good God, I feel sad now. In the end, despite the plot being bare bones and too many characters being brought in, Vampire Hunter D was a fun time reading. I enjoy the action, the lore, and especially the main character that makes the novel such an entertaining read. I barely read light novels like this, but if you're looking to get into any, especially if you're into the supernatural stuff that isn't Twilight, then this is definitely a great choice for you. I'm hoping to be impressed by the second novel when I read it later on down the road, but one can only hope. And I can honestly say that Vampire Hunter D is definitely worth the read. If you're a big fan of supernatural novels, or if you're a big fan of anime supernatural novels, if you're a fan of vampires altogether, or if you're just looking for something different to read and whatnot, something supernatural to read, also check out this book. I definitely recommend it, and it's definitely a good read. And I know there's going to be a lot of Vampire Hunter D books I'm going to cover, because from the last time I checked, the author pretty much wrote 22 books. So, you know, here's to hoping. But anyway, guys, that's all I have for this review. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you give Vampire Hunter D a read. I enjoyed it. It's definitely a lot of fun. I pretty much put off some other projects. I'm gonna jump right back on them as well, and I'm gonna bring you guys some more content for this channel, because I know it's been a long time since I put anything on this channel. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and be sure to like the video if you actually enjoy it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. This is Crazy Kent. I'm out. Peace.